Janine Lee, whose broadcasting career spans over 25 years, began as a researcher in Gqeberha office based in the Eastern Cape. Soon after that, she was handed over the mic and never looked back. Passionate about human interest stories, she found her niche in breaking stories, some easy and some challenging and heart-drenching.
The Eastern Cape, it burnt at that time, and Thornhill that way. The thing is, what is hard, while you can get excited about how dramatic it is from a journalistic point of view, we were then told about an old couple that had tried to get away and they hadn't made it. So we ended up interviewing their son, and I mean, he was absolutely heartbroken. So were we, because it snaps you out of your work mode, and you just see a son who has lost his mom and his dad, and he showed us where they had tried to get to safety, and there had been an outside bath on the plot where they stayed, and where they tried to crawl under the bath. So he showed it all to us, but it definitely brings you back. It snaps you out of that work, trying to get the great shot, trying to get this, and you realize, no, wait a minute, you know, people have lost their lives.
Being an all-rounder at the SABC best describes the newly appointed Eastern Cape regional editor. From covering historical events such as the 2010 World Cup to grassroots stories, highlighting the daily plight of basic services of people in the rural areas. Yuri Lnote used his voice and lens to tell award-winning stories. One that will forever be embedded in his heart was the funeral of former President Nelson Mandela.
Personal point of view, I during that time worked as a reporter, I worked as a camera person, also as a radio reporter. Whatever skills you had were called upon to be used, because it's such a big story, and the hunger for anything fresh, anything new over that period was pretty significant, and it didn't matter if it was 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you always had to be ready. And it was a special time, because then you could see the power of the SABC when everything was put together, and all our logistics and all the experience within the company came to the fore. And for 12 days it was a seamless broadcast, a significant milestone event for the company, and something which I was part of and happily part of. And that will also go to me for the grave as the biggest story of my life.
I once had to interview Ahmed Katrada.
Yes.
A teacher turned multi-award-winning radio reporter, Veronica Fourie, beautiful and artistic storytelling to the theatre of the mind made her a formidable force within the SABC radio landscape. She had the extraordinary ability to take you on a mystical journey through a riveting storytelling, capturing audiences from all ages.
I like to do human interest stories. And I remember one day we were driving from Grafrenet back to PE after doing a story there. I was with a television crew, I had to do radio. And along the road I saw this guy. He was a real tramp. He had he wasn't wearing a shirt. He had short pants on to his knees, no shoes. He had a black eye patch, and he had this funny cart with him. It was like the back part of a car, but it had 2 horses pulling it, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, but I realized he has a story. I always believe, like most journalists do, that every person has a story. So I asked the TV crew to please just stop, you know, I would just like to hear what this guy, and then of course they weren't impressed with me because we had a deadline. But eventually I managed to have a talk with him, and it seemed to be a very interesting person. He lost his eye in his work environment, and so he only had a grant that he lived off, and he decided to tour the country. So he made this cart and had it pulled with the 2 horses. He had a guitar. I asked him to play a bit and sing a bit. I wouldn't recommend him to leave his day job because it wasn't really. But anyway, he was so, it's such a colourful person. And I asked him to drive off, and the way he spoke to his dogs and to the horses, it was just such a colourful story. Not a new story at all, but it was a very rich sound and a lovely radio story. And I was so thrilled when I received an award for the story, in the news category, even though it wasn't a news story, but it was a very good radio story. And that was always thrilling for me to do good radio. Radio my heart is with radio.
After watching the plight of people pre-1994, another former SABC journalist, Zola Yeye, was keen to tell their stories, despite the censorship in freedom of press at that time. But for Yeye, nothing comes close to covering the momentous occasion of former President Nelson Mandela's visit to Port Elizabeth following his release.
When Madiba first visited Port Elizabeth then, in Motherwell, massive throngs of people running up and down, screaming, ululating, excited about this giant coming out of prison and making us proud. And then, and then I covered him, I interviewed him. I even interviewed Madiba at home, Ekhaya. And for me, it was historical. It was a milestone. It was a beautiful story to tell. Trials and tribulations, and then freedom.
Remaining impartial and objective, while also ensuring the public broadcaster moves the digital age, are some of the parting shots from these seasoned journalists. Lerato Fekisi, SABC News, Gqeberha.